Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Hot Mic Podcast. The Hot Mic Podcast is where divergent points of view debate and discuss hot topics. I'm Nathan Ivy, your humble host. Welcome back. Got the guys up a little earlier than usual, but we'll just get straight into it. How is everybody? Happy Friday to you.
Uh, I'm a little concerned, Nathan, about the tabloid-like topics that you've been suggesting for this show. I don't want us to get too sensationalist here. You know,
Yeah.
Kevin and I, we're kind of the intellectual types. We like the deep,
Oh,
deep
okay.
issues. Just saying that to start. Just a little
Okay.
warning.
Okay. So Kevin, you and Kevin are the intellectuals. Okay.
Oh, I
Glad to
didn't
know.
mean it that way, but
And that's what you said,
you know what
Phil.
they call it. You know what tough love is all about, right? So
Oh, tough love. Okay, now I need tough love. All right. Under
Hey Nathan,
assault already.
I will say that I am not above the tabloid stories and the gossip, man. I like the intellectual stuff too, but I will get down with the Twitter verse, TikTok verse, all of that stuff, man. I
Hmm.
like that too.
I
Oh
believe
yeah.
I heard this expression. I can't remember where. I think it's called keeping it real. I mean, I don't know where I heard that, but maybe that has some application.
Yes. It's the three amigos again today. And we are badly missing female voices on the show. The sisters, just people tied up. I get it. Work and just living in Trump's new crazy world. I get it. But we are desperately in need of the female opinion. And Terrace tried to get us all cooked on the last show. My wife heard some of that too. She was like, I just popped in, in and out of the meeting, and I heard where and she couldn't really stay for it. I'm like, see. And Kevin, you tried to tell him, bro. You tried to tell him so. It's just certain topics we should never even attempt to do if we don't have female representation. That's just what it has to be.
Well, that
And
text I
some of
read
those
you from my
topics
female friend. That text I read you from my female friend, I think said it all. I didn't hear any of us responding or disagreeing with that. Let's put it that
yeah.
way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna say, Nathan, some of those topics, even if we have females here, we should still tread on thin ice, brother. I mean, just when I heard Terrence mention menopause, I was like, oh boy, we need to stay out of this one. But
Well, let's get into it then. A lot of stuff going on. Let's start with a local story here. This is an image of some very concerned Cincinnati neighborhood residents, and this has everything to do with what's been going over in Hyde Park. And they've got a big dispute. Maybe perhaps Kevin can break it down better than I can, but to my knowledge, what's at stake is that there's a big new shiny development that the majority of city council members, it appears, to be in favor of, that would in some ways kind of change the landscape and the way things have always been in that Hyde Park Square sort of area. And a lot of very vocal, concerned citizens are talking about this. It's just so many ways of looking at it because, people are looking at this to see if Hyde Park residents have the juice, right, to stop development that other neighborhoods that have perceived less juice, right, haven't been able to stop it, right? So people have been looking at it from that lens. Some people are saying it's the tyranny of city council, and they're pledging to make sure that we don't see the same city council because they're so displeased by this development going forward. Looks like the last thing I checked, it looks like the city council is moving in the direction of voting in favor of it. But how do you guys see it? Who's the culprit here? Who do we blame? Because I like to blame people and point fingers.
Well, just blame me
I'm
like you
prepared to
usually
do
do.
that. I am prepared to do that. Sure.
I
Yeah.
have no
Typically, it
doubt.
is you, Phil.
well, I think Nathan, you did a good job of kind of summarizing what's happening and sort of what's at stake. Um, who's to blame? Well, I think if you're looking at it from the Hyde Park standpoint, I think they would say that City Council is largely to blame, or at least the 7 or so members of City Council who agreed to move forward with this. Look, the City Council has a reputation, and fairly or unfairly, that they do not listen to input or feedback from residents. Um, I think this is something that if you live in certain neighborhoods that have seen widespread disinvestment, you would say, hey, welcome to the club. This is nothing new. But as you articulated, there are certain neighborhoods in Cincinnati where there's a sense that their voice carries more weight. But I think what people are finding of late is that the one voice that seemingly carries more weight than even the resident's voice is that of big business and development, which always seems to sort of trump the resident voice. Now, look, I've been covering development and politics for a long time in this area, and there are few developments that come along that don't ruffle the feathers of residents in some way, whether it's signage, building height, landscaping, noise, traffic concerns. There's rarely a development that takes place where everybody who lives in and around that development is satisfied with what is being proposed. So the opposition element of this is not surprising or new. I think what is perhaps new is the amount of the opposition that you see. Like, this wasn't just a handful of disgruntled Hyde Park folks who didn't want this. I mean, there were a significant number of residents who came out in opposition to this, and their pleas kind of fell on, deaf ears at city council. The biggest issue that I had with council on this one was sort of like, they had this big meeting and public hearing last week that lasted like 4 or 5 hours, and residents came and said what they said, but council had already made up their minds what they were going to do. And so in my estimation, it made sort of that whole 5-hour theater somewhat of a waste of time. And I only say that not a waste of time from the residents' standpoint. I mean, their voices deserve to be heard, but it was a waste of time from the standpoint, from the pretense of city council, that anything anybody was going to say at that meeting was going to make a difference. And you can tell that because as soon as the public got done speaking, council members whipped out pieces of paper. Some of them did pieces of paper with prepared statements, which means that they had already had planned what they were going to say because their minds were already made up. So I think from that standpoint, the meeting came off as a bit of a sham. And I think just further solidified this reputation that city council has developed over the past year or two, that it really doesn't listen to and take into account the concerns of the residents.
Any idea as to why that would be? Like, what's fueling that? Why?
Well,
any thoughts on that?
I mean, if you listen to what council members say, I mean, they think this development is good for Hyde Park. It's good for the city of Cincinnati. They believe. And one of the things that you don't find in dispute in Hyde Park is the notion that Hyde Park Square does need something done there, right? So there's not, I don't think, even if you talk to people who are opposed to this particular development, they're not opposed to the redevelopment of Hyde Park Square, because I think there's a sense that the square is in need of help. It's been dying, that businesses have not been being successful there. And so it needs an infusion of juice, so to speak, there. The challenge has been this 85-foot tall, boutique hotel that's going to be a part of this development that many people say is going to disrupt the skyline there, the views, the ambiance, so to speak, of Hyde Park Square, that people say is what make it special. And, there also been some rumblings about truly affordable housing is not necessarily a part of this development, because I understand that some of the apartments there are going to be upwards of $4,500 maybe a month or so. I don't know how true that is. Those are numbers that I've heard. How true that is or not,
working class affordable.
Yeah, I honestly can't say. The point of the matter is that whatever housing they're putting in there, it's not deemed as quote unquote affordable housing that's there. And so those are some of the issues there. But council apparently believes this is a good a good thing for Hyde Park and a good thing for the city.
Yeah. What's your take, Phil?
Well, when I saw that picture of that meeting, I can't tell you guys how many of those kind of meetings I sat through, and for hours and hours and hours, mostly because whoever was in charge of the committee wouldn't put a time restriction, which I always thought was stupid. So it just goes on and on. So I did have some sympathy. I would disagree with Kevin, or perhaps with you, Nathan, if I understand what you were asking, about the idea that city council doesn't listen to the residents. They just kind of listen to the business community. That was not my experience. My experience was, if you normally, they're very sensitive to neighborhood opinion. And often there are people on council that kind of almost help create an issue just to get support from a large number of neighborhood people, because it translates into votes. I have not, it has not been my experience that, oh, the whole neighborhood wants it, but, oh, these business guys, they don't want it. Now, so how does that relate here? I can only assume that, given the fact that you have a large number of people, and there are probably people who vote, and the fact that 7 council members still supported it, tells me that there's something more here that we're not quite aware of. Because 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, screw it, we'll go with whatever the neighborhood wants. So I think there is more here going on. Now, I'm guessing from reading the articles about it, apparently, first of all, this was going to apparently bring a lot of money into the city as far as their tax base. And the people who were going to be brought in, from what I guess are fairly well-to-do, higher income people. You could say, well, who cares? What? Well, the problem with the city of Cincinnati, at least for years and years, is the people with the money have kind of been moving out of the city. And that means you have a poor base and a lower tax base. And then we start wondering, well, why don't they fix this in this neighborhood? Why don't they do this? Well, because there's no money, because the money is left. And I'm guessing the reason, despite the political risk that these guys supported this, is they saw that it was going to bring a lot of money, increase the city's tax base, and in particular, it was going to draw higher income people, which we need in this city. So that's
I would
my
also
take.
add too, Nathan, I think one element that people don't seem to recognize sometimes with these developments and sometimes with these zoning issues, and Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but legally, if there is not, real grounds for which to deny a zoning request or a change of zoning, if it's allowable by the law and city statute, you kind of have to be careful about that in government, because if you deny a development for just because people say they don't like it, but you don't have any real solid like structural grounds for which to deny it, you can open yourself up to a lawsuit from some of these developers as well. So it's not just as simple as saying, a whole bunch of residents don't like it, therefore we vote it down. You have to have some solid ground upon which to deny these types of developments. But Phil can probably speak more to that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And Kevin is exactly right. On these zoning issues, city council doesn't have the right to kind of vote them down just because people in the neighborhood don't like it. The way the zoning laws, just like Kevin said, I would not at all be surprised if the city solicitor sent a memo, which would not be public because it would be client attorney confidential. The one thing is not subject to public records requests are legal memos, stuff from the city lawyers. I would bet that those council members got a memo that said, hey guys, legally, we do not have a right to deny this. And if you do, we're going to get hit by a multi-million-dollar suit by a developer. If I had to guess, excuse me, if I had to guess, I would say that that is probably the most likely reason
Yeah, but I
why they
thought what was
supported it.
issue here is they just voted to allow a zoning change. Right. They didn't have to do
Right.
that.
Exactly. You don't know that.
They
That's
did.
not necessarily the case. There are certain, excuse me, there, what I'm telling you is there are city councils, and Kevin just referred to this, city councils do not have complete freedom to make or to make or refuse to make zoning changes.
That can't
It's
be
no,
true.
there are certain parameters. Excuse me, there's certain parameters that list if these things are met, then you can make a zoning change. If not, you can't. This kind of thing. Or if somebody makes an application and they've met the legal criteria, that often the
That
council
can't be
does
true.
not have
That
the
can't be
freedom
true
to
because if
deny
that
it.
was the case, then why are they having an important vote? Like, so this
And why
vote
are they
so this
having a
vote was
vote?
unimportant in the process?
Yes. Yeah.
I,
So
I,
the answer to that question, Nathan, in terms of what you're saying is there are certain steps along the process of this zoning process where if the community was actually going to be successful in stopping this, it would have need to have happened way before last Wednesday. Once it got to this point in council, it was pretty much a formality that it was going to go through because it had already cleared many of the hurdles. That's why I said what I pretty
But
much
but
said
but
about,
you said it was
well,
a formality. So what would have happened if instead of 7-2 in favor, council voted 2-7 against it? It wouldn't have.
so it,
I tell you what happened. I possibly, again, we don't know for sure because we don't have the legal memorandums, but it's possible that the city, the developer might have had a right to sue the city, and the lawyers specifically said, "We're going to lose. It's going to cost us millions and millions of
Right.
dollars." That again, I can't guarantee it. If I went if I talk to a member of council, they'd let me know. But I would guess that's the most likely reason because I can tell you right now, when you have a majority of council members that vote against what the community wants. I mean, they are taking a
yeah.
big political
Yeah,
risk.
I'm pretty sure that I agree with Phil on this one. I'm pretty sure that the legal constraints, again, just having covered this and followed these sorts of issues as long as I have, the early stages of when these things get introduced in these early parts of these committees and the planning commission and all of that stuff, that is your best opportunity as if you are an opposition group to either halt or try to get the developer to modify the plans in such a way to conform or meet with what you want. Once these things hit a certain point in that process, like the planning commission vote was really probably a much more critical vote than even the city council vote last week because and that's why so many people took issue with the fact that like almost half of the planning commission didn't show up for that vote because people understood how critical of a vote that was. But once it sort of got through planning commission, I mean, it really would have taken something significant for to get a 2-7 vote or 2-7 vote the opposite direction of council sort of voting this thing down because the train was already pretty far down the track at that point.
Yeah, and to add to that point, there are certain rules about when and again, I haven't been into this stuff for a long time, but when the planning commission supports something, it isn't just city council doesn't have an automatic right to overrule it. There are certain parameters that if they're not met, they have to go along with what the planning
You
commission
know, again,
recommended.
on this one, I'm gonna have to like defer to your guys' thoughts on this because I don't have any inside knowledge. But just coming from the world of common sense, that makes no sense whatsoever. So what you're telling me is this big vote from that was 7-2 in favor had no consequence on whether that project was coming forward. Are you guys? I think we need to Google that.
No, it was necessary. It
Okay, so
was
then that means
necessary for
that
the
they didn't
project
have
to
to
move
vote
forward.
for it. They could have voted against it because they felt like, you
They,
know what, residents don't like it.
Yeah, you're right, Nathan. They could have done that, but it would have come with most likely, as Phil said, a multi-million dollar lawsuit from the developer. And I think the point that we're both trying to make is that that is very unlikely because the city is not going to walk headlong into a lawsuit that they know, millions of dollar lawsuit that they know that they're most likely going to lose because they don't have strong legal grounds upon which to deny a project.
Yeah. I'm gonna have
That
to
would
do
be,
that.
I mean, look, from a council standpoint, like it or not, it would be irresponsible if they did that. It would be an irresponsible use of taxpayer dollars to walk headlong into a lawsuit that you know you can't win, especially when you've gotten legal advice. That to me is equally as devastating politically as going along with something that residents don't want, because at least in one case you got people who are mad for sure, but in another case you're costing millions of dollars that the city isn't going to have now, and that's probably going to wind up costing somebody else, other neighborhoods somewhere down the line.
Yeah, can I tell you something? I have a close friend who is a pretty prominent attorney, and he's a just one of my closest friends. He has a basement, a renovated basement in his house that he somewhat jokingly named after a particular member of city council, because has sued the city of Cincinnati so many times, particularly because this one council member, was trying to be kind of sensationalist and get some political juice by voting something that really they didn't have the right to do. And again, my friend has won numerous lawsuits against the city when they overstep what the law allows.
All right, all right. I'm gonna defer. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Also, why do we even have? I just It comes up every single year. It never seems to change. There's no will to really change it. Just complain about it. So I guess I'll just add to it with these thoughts, which is that we have these community councils, and it's like they have zero power whatsoever. I mean, I really wish somebody would like put whatever the papers are necessary to put something on the ballot so that we can make a determination as to whether these council meetings are going to have any impact whatsoever, because they have no real teeth. They need some leverage over city council for it to even matter.
Well, I could tell you that when I was there, obviously it depended how strong or how representative, whatever, the neighborhood council was of people. But I can tell you, council members do listen to them. Okay, and believe me, because there are votes at stake, and there may not be a official legal leverage like, if we cross them,
Yeah.
they can overrule us. But there is a lot of political
Yeah, it's all
leverage.
rhetorical, like. But in terms of like, again, I haven't done this, but just my general recollection is I think back to all the various similar situations as we're talking about right now with Hyde Park, where you had like a community council that had an issue with a development, and the council was against the development itself. That the development didn't even go forward. It's like, so I know we like the idea of it, but until they get some real leverage, community councils are just like, I'm not going to say they're a waste of time, but they're very nearly a waste of time when it all comes down to it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that 100%, Nathan. I mean, look, I think there are a lot of things that community councils, like, we have a tendency to focus in and pay attention to these big things. Like when there
Things
are
that really
big
matter.
things, big news developments that happen and it doesn't go the way of a community council, then we look at those and we say, well, community council has no leverage. Council doesn't listen to them.
Right.
But I think there are a ton of what I would say smaller things that take place within these neighborhoods and within these communities that do go the way that community councils want them to go, and they do get support from City Hall on some of them, but they don't win them all, and that's the thing. And if there's anything that you want to say, take a look at the bigger issues and how often they come out on top of those. And it may be a case that they don't win many of the big issues. And that might be a separate conversation about how much this council listened to community councils on these bigger things. And when, as Phil said, when we're talking about major dollars coming in or big additions to the tax base, I mean, can you really expect to win those types of battles as a community council when city council is trying to take a look at the bigger picture, the bigger infrastructure, the bigger economic issues. So somebody who serves on a city council would probably be able to speak to that better than I can. But I think there's a tendency when we look at big issues like this to say, well, community councils don't have any voice. I don't know that that's entirely fair or 100% true, because there's probably a lot of things, smaller things than this, that they probably do have voice
Yeah,
and that they probably do
yeah.
get.
Yeah, a lot of smaller, less important things, but the big things, nada. Developers are like 20,000 and when it comes to what city council, these council, various neighborhood councils, in terms of being at odds on developments, they seem to always lose. And I'm like, it's a shame, because what that tells me is that in the city of Cincinnati, you really have no control. Like, Hyde Park should have more control over the distinctiveness of developments and as they come in, because that's what makes a Hyde Park. And I feel the same way with all these neighborhoods, right? That's always what made Cincinnati, different. And another developer coming in with another cookie cutter, cost saving, fast buck, quick turnaround project. It's always the same.
Well, this one, from what I read, is not would not be
Okay.
described like that. I'm not saying I support it. This was looked a pretty well, first of all, fairly high end apartment and hotel complex, it and I think it said it was what, 3,600 a month or something. Meaning, the point is that it's designed to bring high income people in, which ultimately will also support those businesses in Hyde Park. And I understand that people, I think it was mostly the height that they felt it takes away from the ambiance. And I grew up in Hyde Park, at least since we moved
Right.
here in 1969. So I'm very aware of it. For what it's worth, it used to be kind of I don't know, middle is like restaurant places like the Echo, if you've been there, kind of mom and pop kind of stuff. Now it's become much more of a high end restaurant boutique kind of a neighborhood, for
The
whatever
current
that's
city
worth.
council is like, trash bag water to me right now, because the other part that I started thinking about.
Well, excuse me. What the heck
Trash
is that?
bag
I've never
water.
heard that. Trash
Yeah.
bag water? Is this? Well, did you get this off the internet, or is this some kind of street talk that
I
I'm
don't know
not
what it
aware
is,
of?
man, but as I'm looking at this story, I'm
Jeez.
thinking, I- what are the wins that this super majority of Democrats on city council have delivered? Like, what are the wins? I'm sure they are, but I can't think of any of the wins. And I just feel like this is a prime opportunity for a majority of Democrats in these days and times to show up and show out as much as they can, being in a red state. I need to see more from them.
Well, it's not a red
I
city. The
know, but it's
city
a
is
red
very,
state,
very
and
blue.
the state has a lot of tentacles.
It has no influence on city
It
council.
has a
There's
whole
no
lot of
influence
influence
on
on
city
city council and the
council.
type of laws that they can pass. Yes, it does.
Hey, Nathan, but here's the one thing
Oh,
that's true that sometimes we forget about politics is we talk about red and blue, but green is the one thing that both parties respond to. Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are just as susceptible to the green of big business as are the Republicans. Sometimes liberals like to think that that's not true, that, oh, it's the social issues and it's all of these things. But that's one of the criticisms that, people who are on, you can call it the far left or maybe on the more progressive ends of the Democratic Party is they see that the Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton esque type, and even they would even say the Obama type Democrats to a degree are still somewhat beholden to big business interests, just like the Republicans are. That's why they don't see. That's why some people don't see a ton of difference between the two parties, and I think you see it show up in instances like this, and I think it's where liberal people sometimes have even an issue with Democrats that they elect, because let's just face it, that I think Nat Turner said it in the comments. Cream, cash rules everything around me, and that is true regardless of party, I think. And so you're not going to see even the Democrats buck up too much against big business and money interest when it comes right down to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt anything you're saying, but I would love I just feel like this is a great opportunity for a super Democrat majority in these days and times And I just wanted to see them push the boundaries of whatever a Democrat majority's, goals are that you think are good for people. We want to see them. I want to see them as a clash against what the Republicans are offering, and so people can really make a big decision for themselves. So, but it's the world we live in. It's all about the money, huh? You have no. So once again, we learn you don't really have any control. The developers control your neighborhood. You can invest in your neighborhood for 10, 15, 20 years. Doesn't matter. The big time developer can come in and can change the very thing that you liked about the neighborhood. Let's say the skyline. The very thing that you loved about that neighborhood can be taken away from you by even out of town developers just because they're developing. That's sad. That
Yeah.
is sad. It shouldn't
Well,
be that way.
well, here's the thing that I will say is that change is inevitable, and I think no matter where you live, um, if you're thinking about buying a house and you're thinking about moving into a particular area, go into your city hall and look and see what the long-term development plans are for the community where you're planning on moving in. And I say this again, just from years of covering, I used to cover Mason and Westchester and those areas when they were developing, when they were nothing but cornfields. And people who lived out there used to have the same complaints about things that were going to come up: signage height, building height, messing up the skyline. People were used to having all of these wide open acres of land and green space out there, and it's gotten eaten up. Now, I think people who look at those communities now would look at that and say, well, man, everything that's happened in those communities over the last 25, 30 years has been a good thing. Look at all the development, look at all the shopping, look at all the housings out there. But that was not the tenor of the people who were living out there at the time as these things were being developed. So I will say that the city isn't right all the time, developers aren't right all the time, and certainly people who live in places aren't right all the time. And one of the things that I kind of disagree with you saying that, people should have more control or say, I think it should be a collaborative process for sure. But the reality is if you gave people the option to kill or allow projects to go forward, they would kill a whole lot more things than they would allow to go forward, because they would not want the sanctity of their area or whatever they believe to be impacted by development. And that's just the case. People don't want to see their peace and quiet or whatever it is messed up with a Walmart, but they'll go there and shop after it gets built.
And I'm just saying, I just feel like, the very essence of, chasing the American dream should be, in my opinion, the fact that you work hard and put yourself in a place to buy a home, and you should have more latitude and say so about what's happening around your no home and your neighborhood than some big time developers. But we know how it is. I mean, that's just me just wishing
Well,
for a
this
better
thing
and
that
brighter, tomorrow.
this was not a residential neighborhood. I don't say they shouldn't have, the Hyde Park folks shouldn't have input and have concern, but it's not exactly like your home. I mean, it is
That is
a
true.
commercial
That is true.
area
Very
there.
true. Good point.
But by the way, if you could save the tape where you said you deferred to me and Kevin,
Okay.
I'd
It'll
appreciate
it'll
that. I might want to use that. I might want to use that at
it'll
some point,
it'll be
months
up
ahead. Who
shortly after
knows?
the
Who
show.
knows
You
for a
can
while?
check it
And
out.
Nathan,
Yeah, thank
I
you.
would
Appreciate
also
it.
just push back a little bit too, is that these neighborhoods and people do have control. They have a great deal of control, and that's in their vote. And there are already people in Hyde Park who are talking about this being a city council election year. And I think we've got like 27 candidates or something like that who've indicated that they're running for council. I think there's a petition going around as well right now with some folks who are upset about the vote. And so as much as you can, the control that you do have is over who you elect. And I think somebody made the point. I mean, I don't know what the electoral breakdowns were from the previous council election, but I would venture to say that this current council probably got a lot of votes from Hyde Park. And so you got to ask yourself, kind of like those folks who voted for Trump and got laid off in the federal government, if you living out in Hyde Park and you voted for this council, you got to ask yourself, how's that working out for you right now?
Okay. I'm cool with that. Let's move on. So man, overnight, Trump said that he signed an executive orders that are aimed at ending federal funding for the NPR and PBS, respectively, National Public Radio. Was that public broadcasting station or system? I believe it is PBS. Many of us of a certain generation grew up on both of those. Um, well, some are saying that he just doesn't have the executive authority to do it through an executive order. But what do you think about this debate? Republicans are really pushing, they're claiming that both are politically biased. Haven't heard that before. That's what the claim is.
Oh, that's been a frequent. No, that's been around, Nathan. That
I'm just saying
accusing them of
that's the
having
point I'm making.
uh,
That's the
a.
point I'm trying to make sarcastically. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said
Yeah, I
you
was
hadn't
being
heard that before.
sarcastic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course
Oh,
I've heard
okay,
it
sorry.
before. So, but what do you think? Some are saying now, I guess, re-examining our federal commitment financially to NPR and PBS. I think it's a bunch of BS. That's what I think it is.
Mhm.
Once again, Republicans are trying to, they're trying to do two things. If possible, is search and destroy any media that we don't already control. And at the very least, what we're trying to do is to intimidate so that you'll be more favorable and flexible toward us in your coverage. We've seen this playbook over and over and over again. I think federal funds should be spent on NPR and PBS because they make us better. They make us smarter, right? And I don't think there's very much bias other than a bias between lies and telling the straight truth. And
Yes.
Republicans don't like that. But
Yep.
that's just me.
No, I
That's
think
just me. What do you think?
I think you hit the nail right on the head, and I don't think that there's, even though I probably will say a ton more, there's not a ton more to say beyond what you just said. I mean, it really is that simple. Bias to them is not taking what they say hook, line, and sinker and presenting it unquestioned, particularly when you know that a lot of the information that Donald Trump and his folks present is just factually inaccurate. I mean, take the interview that he just did. I can't, what was it, CBS or one of the interviews he did just within the last couple of days where he's presenting, digitally doctored information about tattoos on a guy's knuckles. And it's like, and he is sitting there swearing by what to be factually inaccurate information, and he's pushing back on the interviewer who's refusing to accept false information. And this is what Trump and people in his ilk view as bias. That's not bias. That's the job of the media, is to present facts and debunk and disprove things that are not accurate. Unfortunately, Trump traffics in so much of that, whether through ignorance or just blatant uh, uh, misdirection and deception, that that is what he wants from all media. And anybody who doesn't do that, you find yourself in his crosshairs. Here's the thing that we really need to be talking about, that not enough Americans are talking about, is this overuse of executive power. I mean, it's like every day Trump is trying to execute some type of executive order or instituting something, and nobody in America is saying anything about this executive abuse of power. Look, they had plenty to say when Barack Obama was in the White House and he was issuing executive orders, not nearly at this clip, mind you, but Republicans in particular were incensed by what they were calling Obama's abuse of executive power. Now nobody's batting an eye that Trump is dropping dozens of executive orders seemingly almost every day, and nobody has anything to say about that, except I will say, give Rand Paul some credit, because I don't know if you saw this recently this week, but Rand Paul was actually giving his Republican colleagues in Congress, of reading them a bit of the riot act, saying that they had pretty much abdicated their congressional responsibility to approve the budget and different things like that, that they were just willfully turning that over to the president without even, without even voting on some of this stuff. So kudos to Rand Paul for at least having the wherewithal and the guts to challenge and say what a lot of Republicans on that in Congress, won't say, that they're just going along to get along with Trump. But that's what people need to be talking more about, is just this gross overuse of executive power by Trump in doing and trying to do things that he can't even legally do, like strip funding from NPR and PBS and these other things, which constitutionally he's not, allowed to do.
Yeah. Phil, your thoughts?
I think we have to separate the process from the issue itself. And Kevin is 100% right in that almost everything he's done in terms of dismantling programs, he has no right to do through an executive order. He has no right. If Congress sets up, whether it's the Corporation for Public Broadcasting or any of these other programs, if Congress sets it up, he doesn't have the right through an executive order to dismantle it. I mean, it's totally unconstitutional and illegal, and I think he's probably going to end up losing on a lot of these things. However, much like the USAID money, what he is shrewdly doing is shutting these down, firing all the people. So basically, even if there's a court decision down the road, which he may choose to obey, that says it was illegal, it's kind of too late. It's the toothpaste out of the tube. It's too late. Now, what's really scary is we have three supposedly co-equal branches of government. Well, he's ignoring the Congress, and given the weakness of the Republicans in Congress, I don't know if it'd make much difference if they were even passing stuff. Do you notice that? I don't think, has Congress passed anything in these last 100 days? Have they? I've never heard about this. I mean,
they've passed the basics of a budget that's now going to the Senate.
Okay, which they legally required to, but basically he's kind of ignoring Congress, and the Republicans are going along with it, and it sounds like he's ignoring the courts. So basically, what we're talking about is a guy who wants to be a dictator. I don't think those words are too strong. Now, if getting back to the issue itself, I listen to PBS and NPR all the time. I may have said this before, but there's an expression: the good is the enemy of the best. And what I mean by that is what they do at PBS and NPR is good. It really is. This is not fraud. This is not waste. But there are many things the federal government spends money on that are good things. In fact, the AmeriCorps, which we may want to talk about, that just came up today, there are good things, but the best is not for the federal government to be involved. Just like we talked about funding for universities, I feel the same way about this. I and others who listen to PBS should have to pay for it. And I've said this over and over. Constitutionally, the federal government doesn't have the right to fund media. It's not in the Constitution, or I should say the Constitution says unless it's stated there, they can't do it. So from both a constitutional standpoint, but also so media outlets, or universities for that matter, have freedom of expression without having to please the federal godfather. I don't think we should be funding media.
Shouldn't be funding media. Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nathan.
We just philosophically, I already know we're never going to agree on this, but I mean, I just struggle with political philosophies that don't actually support things that help people. And a lot of the Republican philosophies are so caught up in the philosophy part of it that you forget that, government at its core is supposed to help people. PBS, NPR make us better on a variety of different levels. I mean, PBS has been instrumental. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree with that.
All the good
I
people,
agree.
when we think about the good old days, right, with those people back in the day when you could leave your door open, you know what they was watching? PBS, right? You know what they children watch? PBS, right? So we listen, we got decades worth of evidence, in my opinion, just sort of anecdotally, and y'all guys know it too, that both of those entities, I would put in the public good realm of things, and consider and can
I
okay,
agree. I
and
agree with that.
if
I
it makes
agree.
the public
However,
more educated, more well balanced, that means you get
I agree.
stronger
It
people,
does.
better citizens, better entrepreneurs, better moms and dads, better innovators. This is about the future, Phil. This is an investment on some level in America's future.
Well, I don't think kids
I'm
watch
just
that.
saying.
Maybe they
I'm
do,
just
but
saying. That's
that's
what it is, and the
I love.
federal
I just
government
said I
should
think
do
they're
that.
great
The
stations.
federal government has done enough
Okay.
negative, nasty, mean, racist things. They should, in some levels, be doing some good things for the betterment of citizens and mankind. And and that's what tax dollars should do.
Well, let's ask this question. Right now, we have is it 36 or 37 trillion dollar, uh, not deficit, shortfall, essentially what we owe. 36 trillion, the national debt, $36 trillion. Now, here's the question I'll throw to you. Do you think that's an issue or problem, and it's something that could really, really wreck this country in the years ahead, which I believe, and I've said before, this is going to lead to a massive depression, inflationary depression, in my opinion, far worse than anything we've experienced
I,
before. Now, if one agrees with that, first of all, I don't agree with my Republican friends that cutting taxes is good. No, with all respect for Ronald Reagan, they came up with this BS supply side thing which basically means we're going to cut taxes without making up for it with revenue. Okay, and so or with cutting spending. And so we have built on this. They claim that well, this will ultimately bring more tax income
I
in.
thought you had a
No,
question.
it doesn't. And so, just for a sec, what I am saying, I didn't mean to get kind of off on a tangent, but what I'm saying is we must cut this, okay, whether it's through tax increases or budget cutting. And I would simply say, given what I consider the fiscal crisis that we are in, I think we need to limit what the federal government does to basically military and stuff
Th-
that affects it, basically interstate stuff. I don't think we can
I
afford to
think
do
you
any of these things,
I think you
however
mean
good they
well. I
are.
think you mean well, Phil. As I'm reading you, I think you mean well,
Thank you.
but you're completely misguided in the sense that, you know,
Huh.
you
You give
yeah, I'm
then you
just
take it
saying
away.
you're completely misguided. And I think initially your question was going to be, do I think that our national debt is an issue or not? Right. And I would say,
Yeah.
to my limited understanding as I sit here, yes. I see that as a I see
Okay.
that
Where do
I
you
see
cut
that as a
then? Where do you
ballooning
cut?
crisis. But I think that the way to deal with that is based at its core on investments, not cuts. We're not going to cut our way out. We are
Now
not.
you're
It is
sounding like a
impossible,
Republican.
intuitively, fiscally, in any other kind of way, for us to cut our way out of what we're talking about in terms of our national debt. It's never going to
What do
happen.
you mean by
It has to be
investment?
a
What's that mean?
combination of recalibrations, because we talk about cuts, and in some cases, I think that the real world should be recalibrations, adjustments, and also future investments, right? In the people that come after us. Somebody
What
has
does
to,
that
I'll tell you
mean?
what
A
that means.
future
Somebody
investment. What's
has
that
to
mean?
support the next generation of workers and innovators, scholars, and all the other people
By
that make
spending
the
more
United
money?
States competitive. Like, do we want to be here in
By
we have to
spending
make
more
a
money?
decision. Do we want the United States to exist in 24? And if the United States does exist in 22-24, do we want to be an alpha or do we want to be a beta? Because a lot of what I hear
Or what about being
a lot
broke?
of
How
what I
about
hear
being broke?
Republicans saying that they agree with, in my opinion, leads us to be the beta in the future. I want this country and my great grandkids to be in the alpha country. That means that we have to think sensibly and invest in tomorrow. And so, yeah, we might have to give up some money. We might
Exactly.
have to
That's
give up
my
some money
argument.
for
My
kids
argument.
to eat free in schools. Why? That makes them that
So
will.
you're going to pass along a $35
I'm
trillion
just saying.
debt, and that's going to help the future generations?
You
They have
know
to pay that.
intuitively and in any other way, Phil, because you are a man of common sense, that there is no way that a future America is going to cut its way to deal with the trillions of dollars of debt. It's got to be an investment.
Well, they can also raise
Yeah,
taxes
well,
too. They can
that's what I
raise
was
taxes.
going to say. I mean, I think both of you are right on in terms of what you're saying, and the truth
No,
of what the country needs to do is a combination of probably the two things. I mean, look, you need to only look at it similarly to as you would look at your household budget, right?
no.
If you are
Yeah.
if you have debt in your household and you're looking to pay that debt out, there are a couple of different ways that you can reach
This is
that
a terrible
conclusion.
analogy.
You can either
It's a good analogy.
you can either cut some things that do fewer things that you're already used to doing and divert those funds that you were using there to
and
paying
there's
down
lower spending.
This is
what
a
you owe,
terrible analogy.
or you go out
It's a good
and you get a second job. In other words, you find out a way to bring in
This is
more
an
revenue to your house.
oversimplification of this issue.
No,
It
really isn't. It really
is.
isn't, Nate.
It
It
isn't.
really
It
really
most
isn't.
No,
It
it
really
is
isn't an
not.
oversimplification. I think people who don't like to have that discussion call it an oversimplification, but it's
No,
really not.
you would be
And
wrong in thinking
I'm
that.
getting here's where I'm getting at with that is you can either cut or you can either raise more money.
But
And
you
the way in
started
which
off
the United
wrong.
States can raise the way in which the United States can raise more money is you can increase your taxes on your wealthiest Americans who right now many people feel like are not being taxed at levels in which they should be taxed at. Now it's a simple solution. If you don't want to make cuts, then the alternative to that is that you got to increase your taxes on the wealthy because there are only a couple of ways again in which to eliminate the debt.
Bro,
Is you got to bring in more money or you got to reduce
bro,
your spending. I mean, it's basically that simple.
federal spend
And there's
that you have just committed one of the greatest like lies that I have heard people tell over and over and over again, right? Which is this comparison to a personal household to the federal government. There is no comparison whatsoever in any way that we could use those two
Well, the difference is a
and
household doesn't have a printing press. It doesn't have
there is
unlimited
no
borrowing power.
similarities
That's the
between
difference.
those two in any way that could make any kind of useful comparison for what we're talking about. It is not the same, not in the scope, not in the various financial actors. There's no Fed equivalent to a household. And so, just considering that alone, there's no way you can make that comparison. But I understand.
Maybe an even better one is a credit card. You know how it is when you get you don't have the money to pay for your credit card bill, say in the current month, whatever. So you make the minimum payment. Okay, what happens? The interest, you're paying a ton more in interest. Okay, and then if you keep making the minimum payments, eventually you can't even afford the minimum payments, which is a way of saying you're broke, you're bankrupt. And I think that is a very appropriate comparison because the federal government, I'm just telling you now, once the Chinese by themselves decide, hey, we're not buying anymore, we don't trust these bonds anymore, and that we saw some of that with Trump's tariffs, how the bond market, when the bond market started to go bad, that's when he put the pause on the tariffs. But the point is, eventually they will stop buying our bonds, and then what the interest rate on our debt will shoot way up. Okay, right now, I think the largest item in the federal budget is just paying interest on the debt. And do you know every year when we have a deficit, which we will this year, and probably more so than Biden or Obama, when we have that deficit, guess how we're going to pay it? We're going to borrow more money to pay that, just like on a credit card. And eventually, it's all going to come falling down. Guys, it's all going to come falling
so Phil,
down.
I'm
And
interested to
you talk
hear
about
Nathan's.
looking for future
I'm interested to
generations.
hear
That's
Nathan's
looking for future generations.
economic dissertation on the national debt and how do you spend it? Because one of the things I notice about Nathan is he can always tell you why you're wrong, but I'm interested to
I
hear
just
what
said
is
it.
his solution on
I
how you.
just said
Okay,
it.
well, so let's hear it, bro. I want to hear it. What is your solution to eliminating the
Oh, so
national
now we
debt?
on that. My
No, I'm just that's the conversation that we're having though. We're talking about the
yeah,
debt, and you're saying that what Phil and I are suggesting is not wrong. You're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
investment. So where is this
Terrible
money
analogy.
for the investment that you're talking about
I
coming
just said
from?
before, there is no way we can all agree on one thing, and that is that the debt is a problem that needs to be dealt with. I just feel like where I disagree with Phil, I don't know where you will fall on this, Kevin, but we're not going to be able to cut our way away from that. We're going to have to recalibrate,
I
and we're
agree.
going to have we're going to
Okay,
have to
so what
invest.
is your way? What is
One of
your
my
solution,
ways is
Nathan?
making sure that we keep funding PBS and we keep funding NPR.
That's going to cut the
It
deficit
absolutely
or
is.
cut
It
the that's going to
absolutely
cut the
is.
debt. How's
Because
that? How's it going to?
it's
How's that
helping
work?
create and mold better, well-adjusted, well-informed people. And those are the kind of people that are going to be most productive in the future. And future generations are going to have to pay back that debt. That's why we need smart, intelligent, upperly mobile, capable.
So you're pushing. You don't want to start paying the debt now. You want to push
I'm
it off
saying
to
that
future
future
generations.
generations are going to have to deal with the debt. And the way that we help them,
Why
and
don't we deal with it
how do we do
now?
that, Phil? The way that we help them deal with that debt is by investing in our grandchildren and their children and their
Spending
children,
more money.
because they're going to have to show.
So we make the debt higher. You're saying make it
I'm
higher to
saying
reduce it
we
in the
need to
future.
mold a future generation of intelligent, critically thinking, able-bodied individuals that can go out and lead this country for the next 200, 300, 1,000 years. And we are not
Why don't we
going to
lead
do.
right
See,
now?
that's
Why
why
don't we
China's
lead
going to
it
beat
now?
us. China is thinking 1,000 years ahead, and we're talking about today.
That's not the reason why China is beating
They
China.
are thinking
The reason
long
why
term.
China,
We in this
the
country
reason why
have to
China is
start
beating
thinking long
America.
term.
Look, let's just be real about this. The reason why China is beating America is because they steal intellectual property, they manipulate their currency, and they don't have the same sort of labor laws and restrictions that the United States have that create fair markets and fair labor. So you can't compare what a dictatorship in China
Yeah.
is doing to the United
Yeah, I
States of
can.
America, because they're not playing by the same
Yeah. That's
rules that
That's all
America is
true.
trying to
That's
play
all
by.
true. But it's all true, and it does play a role. But on top of that, they are thinking hundreds, if not 1,000 years down the line. And I hear in America, I hear too much me, now, tomorrow. Like, who is building the tomorrow America 100 years from now, 200 years from now? If we're cutting, if we're cutting
That is
all of
what
these
I'm
federal
saying. I'm
programs,
saying
if
let's
we're not
start.
in,
Let's
if
get.
the federal,
I'm saying not. You're the one who's
you
not
get the
thinking long
outcomes.
term.
Look,
You're
look.
thinking push the debt. Push the debt on. That's not long term thinking. I'm
I,
saying start
you
paying it
are
off
paying it
to
off.
protect future
We're just looking at
generations.
it differently. For me, investing in our children, investing in our children's children is dealing with the national debt in the long term. Because as I keep saying, the federal government should be intentionally investing to make sure that we have the backbone, the grit, the educational, the critical thinking prowess to deal with the next generation. That's what we should be focusing on. That should be our goal, because the future is coming. We're not going to live forever.
It's
Yeah, I think I hear what you're trying to say, Nathan. Look, this is not a question of educating and trying to make sure that we create the best of the best. But I do think, what Phil is sort of saying is that at the end of the day, you got to recognize that whether you're talking about the United States, whether you're talking about a household budget or whatever it is you're talking about, that debt at the end of the day will be your undoing. That if you don't manage it effectively, and at best, if you can eliminate it. I mean, just think, like Nathan, just think about this. If you want to talk about the future, just think about your own personal situation. If you were able to get to a point where you could conceivably eliminate your debt and everything that you had coming into your household was essentially things that you could put forth towards your future, towards saving, toward investing, you could do a heck of a lot more without the burden of debt on you than you can with it on there. And so I think it's insane that we're even having this debate about trying to eliminate debt not being a good thing.
That's not the
Okay,
debate.
I think what
That,
I think
when did
what
that become the debate?
I'm with you on the standpoint of there are certain things that we should protect that shouldn't be cut. But I do think that it's insane to sort of say like nothing should be cut from the federal government because we just always need to be building on this and that. I'm with you. I'm not saying that NPR or PBS need to be the things that are laid on the slab. Maybe
Mhm.
Phil feels that way. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but what I'm also not willing to concede is that there are not things that we're doing that we currently don't need to look at and say, do we need to keep doing this? Like everything can't be a sacred cow. It just absolutely cannot be. And I think
We
that
can't afford that. That's the point. We can't afford sacred cows.
yeah, and
We're too
I
much in
think that
debt.
that
We
is
don't have a
I
surplus.
think that's a bad mentality, left or right, to move forward with. Is that there's everything that's in the federal government is untouchable, and that anytime you go to move on or get rid of something, that we can't do that because it's a critical need. That's BS. I mean, it's just flat out BS, because everything that you do in your household budget or anybody's budget is not an absolute need or absolutely something that needs to be done. There are a lot of things that we do because we like to do. Maybe we have the means to do it right now, and so we do those things. But when you don't have those means, those things don't make sense to keep doing them anymore.
This happens all the time. When this kind of stuff comes out, you end up having a conversation that ends up going to like some kind of like, financial 101 sort of conversation. We get all of that. What I'm saying is that everything you said is true, but PBS and NPR are number one priorities because they have helped and will continue to help and shape.
More so than having a military,
I would
having an
say that
army.
if you're going to start looking at where we are, see, I don't like to use the term cuts because that's the Republican term. I like to look at it in terms of like maybe a recalibration, reprioritizing, our spending priorities.
That's just a nicer way. That's just
No,
a nicer way to say it. It makes
it
you feel
doesn't.
that
It
makes you
doesn't.
feel better, Nathan. Having to reprioritizing sounds better than
It's
cuts. But the
not
bottom
that
line
it
is,
makes me
you're
feel
gonna
any kind
stop
of way.
doing
It's just
something.
that
You're gonna
I
stop
want to
doing
take the time
something
to
in
make
favor of
sure that
something else.
how I actually look at it, I'm actually articulating it. So that's how I'm actually looking at it. And yeah, I think we can all agree with that. But NPR and PBS are number one priorities. They are
Well,
sacrosanct
the
and
pro
they
the
need to be
problem is
protected.
you cannot look at any particular program by itself and say, is this a good thing? Is this do good stuff? Because I'm conceding that's good stuff. When I was running for Congress in the Republican primary last year, I remember I was being interviewed by this reporter, and I had been campaigning on balancing the budget, saying if I get to Congress, I am not going to vote for a budget that isn't balanced. This reporter said to me, well, okay, what are you going to cut? You know what I said? I don't care what they cut. I don't care what they do as far as raising taxes or what they cut, because the most important thing is to get out of this debt, or at least stop piling the debt on. And
Yeah.
I really mean that. I mean, that is a far more critical thing for this country than deciding whether one particular program
But
is
I think you need to
necessary or
broaden your
not.
horizons even in that. Like even in that philosophy, I think you should broaden your horizons into how we are realistically and actually going to pay that down while simultaneously educating the future America so we can be competitive.
Well, I see. I just think that's a bad. I think that's a bad argument right there, Nathan, because you can do two things at the same time. Both of you are kind of acting like you can't, like America can't walk and chew gum at the
Not if
same
you're talking
time.
about
Like
cutting
you can't
PBS.
do,
That's
like
my
you
point.
can't do, like you can't do everything that Nathan is talking about doing and also pay down the national debt. Again, remember what I said. There are two ways that you can attack this. You can increase revenue. So again, raising taxes. One of the common refrains is that the wealthy are not being taxed at the rates at which they should be taxed. You do that. That in and of itself will bring in an infusion of cash
Absolutely.
that will allow you to attack the national debt versus tax cuts for the rich, which add on to the debt. Okay, so let's start getting at these wealthy people and getting them to pay. That in and of itself will solve a whole bunch of problems. Now, while at the same time, while you're saying that, if you want to do a careful forensic analysis, and I'm not talking about this crap that Doge did, but if you want to do a careful forensic analysis of everything that we're doing, which I think is smart, I think any
I
smart
think it'd be
government, any
superfluous.
smart business, any smart household should do an
Al
analysis,
Gore did that during the Clinton
should do
years,
an
and
analysis of
he did a
what
great
you're
job.
doing and finding
They
out
already do that.
one, if you're getting a bang for your buck, And two, if there's anything, as Nathan said, if it makes you feel better, recalibrate, right? That should be an ongoing
But it
process that
already
should be
is.
happening
That's
regardless.
see,
Anyway,
that's another part of this conversation. It already is. You know, the federal government has various agencies, including the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, and they do this on the regular. That's the other thing that really ticks me off about this conversation is that we have allowed Republicans to put into our head that people haven't already been doing this with the federal government already, and that somehow we just needed Doge or anybody else to do this because it's just not being done. And that's just not
They
true.
haven't been doing it. They've been
They
piling
have
on the
been
debt
doing it.
every year. Doesn't matter if it's Democrat or president or Republicans in the White House. They keep piling on the debt. The only
That's
president, I think, in the
politicians
last
piling on
20
the
years
debt.
who balanced was Bill Clinton, and that's why, from a fiscal standpoint, Bill Clinton was the best president we've had in many
Thank
years
you.
because he
Right. And see, here's
balanced the
the other
budget.
reason why I just can't let Republicans win on this issue because it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy, right? They want to keep doing things with their tax cuts. Like Trump, what did he do? Trillions of dollars to debt. What they're about to do again in the next month or so, trillions of dollars of debt. Why? Because now it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. Oh, look at all the debt that you accrued under Republican presidents, but then they'll use that as a rationale as to why we need to cut programs like PBS. That's the reason why I refuse to give into their madness because they are creating the crisis just so they can cut what they always wanted to cut.
Well, it's been
Okay,
created for
it needs to
many
be called
years,
out.
ever since Clinton left. Democrats and Republicans have been
You don't hear
piling on the
Democrats saying they
debt.
want to cut PBS
It's a
though, Phil. You don't
nonpartisan
hear
issue.
Democrats saying they want to cut NPR.
What?
You don't hear Democrats saying we got to do some of the things that Republicans say they want to
Oh,
do to Medicare and
I'm
well,
Medicaid.
referring more to. I'm referring, first of all,
well,
more to the
let's
person in the
not
White
confuse
House.
the issues here. First of all, what Trump is proposing to do has nothing to do with the budget. So I think we're mixing things here, and courtesy of Phil's commentary, I think we wind up talking about two different things here because we started out talking about Trump saying he was going to defund NPR and
Right.
PBS. His claim or his stake in doing that has nothing to do with saving money or eliminating the national debt. Phil introduced that. Trump is doing this purely out of spite and out of in the interest of trying to control the media message and the narrative. It was Phil who kind of took us down this pathway of talking about that he didn't feel like NPR needed to be funded by the federal government, that it wasn't one of the things that they should be funded. So let's make sure that we're clear on that the initial topic that we were talking about and Trump's reason for cutting funding to NPR and PBS has nothing to do with
No,
the
you're
national
right.
debt.
If they were conservative, if they had a lot of conservative stuff, he wouldn't. He'd give them more money. But my belief, as I've said, and I pretty much agree with what Kevin's saying, my belief is I don't care if they're liberal or conservative. I just don't think it's something we
Right.
can afford to pay
We
for. And it's a lot. Let me tell you something. The so-called conservatives, Republican conservatives in Congress, they use this thing against Zuckerberg. They were because you have a liberal bias. Well, hey, uh, my, that's a private company. If Zuckerberg had any guts, he would have said, "Hey, I don't think we have a liberal bias, but it's none of your damn business because I got my business. I have a right to have liberal, conservative, or whatever." And they've also used this against the universities. Oh, they're all woke and this and that, so we're going to cut the federal money. And he's doing the same thing now with PBS and NPR. And in my view, it doesn't matter what the leanings of any of these things are, political leanings. I just think from a fiscal standpoint, we cannot is they're good things,
right.
but we can't afford to
I
fund
get
them.
it. I get it. We just feel differently about it. That's okay too. Hey, listen, guys, I've got this might be a little bit of a tearjerker. I'm gonna play a video for you. Then I want to get your advice. And this video is from a very tragic situation. A young woman was dating a man. To my knowledge, they're not married. They've been dating, I believe, for maybe 3 years, and he ended up being in a very unfortunate situation, and he's now dealing with a traumatic brain injury. And she's at a crossroads. and just want to get our thoughts, kind of switch it up a little bit, and get your thoughts about this. I'll play maybe like 30 seconds of the video. I may jump around a little bit, but I won't play all of it for you. No need to do that. All right, check this out. Well, let's let that play first, and then I'll come back to it. I forget sometimes when I'm just cold getting a video that sometimes there's like commercials and ads in between it. Okay, here we go. Give me 1 second.
They want you to pay that extra $10 to get rid of them commercials, Nathan. That's the new racket
Is it?
now out there. Get that YouTube Plus or whatever it is where you can go commercial free.
Okay.
That's the new racket.
All right. Well, I'm getting this one from World Star, but yeah, that makes sense though. I get it. Make their money the way they make their money. All right, check this out, and then to the audience, tell us what you think.
I've been with Jamal 3 years before he got hurt, and then 5 years after when he got hurt. That's when he got his TBI. And one thing for sure is, before that man got his TBI, he loved the ground that I walked on. Like, there's nothing I could ask for. There's nothing that didn't get handled. Nothing, especially with a person who is going through their own healing. So I want to ask tonight, it's going to be a question you can answer here. You can come and answer. When the love changes after trauma, do you stay or do you go?
So that's the question. So she had dating a man for about 3 years. He ended up getting a traumatic brain injury. I think that was 5 years ago, from what she said in the video. And now she's at a crossroads, Kevin. She's like, man, I'm not married, and I'm trying to be there for him. And what do I do? When I saw the video, man, I thought, wow. And she actually put it out there. She was inviting people, for their opinion, which I wondered on some level if she was just looking for permission to put how she feels out there.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, all I can say, man, is God bless her, because you sticking with anybody after a traumatic brain injury. I showed you the images. Is unfortunately, it looks like her boyfriend was, injured pretty badly. I believe it was a shooting. He was shot in the head, from what I got in the video. Yeah, traumatic brain injury, Nat, and she stuck by him, and we can only imagine what that might be like. It's something that we don't
Yeah.
think about like a lot, like taking care of like somebody that's disabled that you love. But my advice would be to her, and it's like at this point it doesn't really matter, because what I could tell from that video is that she's a young woman with a big heart, and she was really like struggling with that situation. And you know what it is. She's like, man, do I go on and live the rest of my life and stop doing this, or how long do I have to do this? I can only imagine she's probably thinking, if I stay here long enough, that maybe he'll come out of it, or come back to some former shape of himself. Um, but I would
Yeah.
say, forgive yourself, sis, and if you got to move on, I don't think anybody would hate on her whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so obviously it's a very difficult situation. And so I'm gonna put this in a couple of different lenses, and you might not see it as any different. I think, they're not a married couple. So I think that in some ways it makes the answer that I'm about to give a little bit different. Because I think when we make our marriage vows to somebody, and again, we kind of got into this a little bit in the last pod. Um, to me, if you take those vows seriously, for better or worse, richer for poor, sickness and health, till death do us part. If when you say those words, particularly if you're a spiritual person, when you say those words, that's not just a commitment of feeling, that is a commitment of will. Because if you've been married for any amount of time, it ain't all the way, marriage ain't always about feelings, because you go through seasons. There are some seasons that are very good, and there's some winters that can happen in your relationship where the feelings might not necessarily be the warm and fuzzies that they were when you first met. But you got to learn how to kind of be able to stick to your commitment and hang in there and work through those difficult periods. And I think in a marriage, whether it's sickness or debilitating injury like this, the call to perhaps stay in there and love somebody through it is a little bit different than when you haven't made that same type of marital commitment. That I think the ability of one to say, hey, this is not something I want to sign up for the rest of my life, that I would say I can definitely understand that. I can definitely
Yep.
understand that. I
But what
think
if you
it's
were like his family member? Like, let's say that was your nephew or your little brother,
Mhm,
and that was his girlfriend.
mhm.
Like, from a family member standpoint, like, would you? And she came to you and said, "Look, I just can't do it no more." How would you look at that?
I would understand it. I would understand it because, again, being somebody's girlfriend or partner or whatever is different than being like a husband or wife. Now, if they were married and it was his wife, I might kind of feel a different type of way about that. But if they had just been dating, and particularly, I mean, she seems like a young lady with a lot of years in front of her. That's a big ask to ask of somebody who's not married to the individual, to basically give up, you know, essentially the rest of their lives, to particularly to potentially take care of somebody who may never recover. Now, if she has that in her heart to do that, God bless her. Many people do not. Many people do not. But it would be totally understandable if she said, you know what, I just I can't do it. And I don't think anybody would fault her. And if I was a family member, I would completely and totally understand that, because like I said, it wouldn't be the same as a marriage commitment, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, for sure. Phil's back just in time.
Yeah, I got a little
Sure.
story, if I may. I have because I think it's very pertinent to what that woman was saying, what we're talking about. This is a friend of mine. I've known him for 40 years or so. He's, I think, in his late 50s. He married a very attractive woman, quite a bit younger, I think, 20 years, maybe something like that, quite a bit younger. And she was in excellent health, looked really nice. They had their first child. I think it was about 7 years ago, had their first child. And whatever happened in through that birth, she developed a very, very severe mental illness and has been that way pretty much ever since, to the point that she can't even function a lot of the times. Some days she can't. She'll be in bed for weeks at a time. Okay, and on top of that, she ballooned out to 275 pounds. Okay, there are a lot of guys, and I think we have to be honest, say we don't know what we do in this situation. We can say now what we hope we would do, but we don't know. This friend of mine has been so attentive to her and so faithful to her and done everything he can to meet her needs. And I just think I give him just a huge amount of credit, because and they're married, but you talk about sticking to your vows or not taking the easy way out. I just have
Wow.
so much admiration for him. And I think that, see, again, I'm not in that situation. I would hope, if I was, that I would stay loyal and serve my wife, but I can't
Wow.
guarantee that.
Nathan, I would add too, and this is just another good thing that I think, if you haven't done this, like if you are whether it's a marriage or in a long-term relationship, like these are the types of conversations that you should have with your partner. If this happens, these would be my wishes, right? So if I would want to, if in this situation with my wife, if it became a situation where it was one of those things where, hey, this is where it is, he's not going to come out of this, blah blah blah, like I would want her to at least know from my perspective, hey, I would be cool if you decided you could not handle it and you wanted to move on, and I release you from that, right? Like I would be okay with that. So where it's as if she chooses to hang in there, right? That's her choice to do it, but she doesn't have to do it with any kind of feeling of guilt or whatever that I'm like, how would I feel about it if this is how she were to move on? And these are like deeper, like this ain't a conversation you want to have with somebody on a first date, obviously, but I'm talking about if you are in a committed, you've been in a relationship with somebody, like these are,
I have this conversation on my first dates just to,
and that's probably why many of your first dates were your last, Phil. But
that was good. That was very good.
but and some of these are kind of morbid conversations, kind of like funeral arrangements and all of that type. But they're necessary conversations to have because you just never know. And I would much rather, myself or my spouse know where we stand on these types of issues so that people don't have to wrestle with their minds and their emotions if they are confronted on it in terms of what would my partner expect of me and what would they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really tough, man. Appreciate the honesty. Uncle Phil kept it real. He said, I like to think I do the right thing, but you never know. I think that's very real. And I agree.
It's the same thing when we talk about standing up for our faith. We say, "Oh, I die for my faith." Well, would we? I mean, it's kind of like not to get too biblical, but there's a part of the Bible where Peter and some of the other disciples say to Jesus, "Oh, we'll do anything for you, and we'll always stick with you." And Jesus saying, "Well, I'm going to go through a lot of stuff, and I don't." And they're, "Oh no, we'll stick with you." Well, okay, Jesus gets arrested, and they all scatter. Okay, so I think that's just
Mhm.
and that's just how we are sometimes, and we don't know until we're in that situation if we're actually going to live up to what we say we believe.
It's funny that you say that, Phil, because I was just sharing this story. My mother passed maybe about 2 or 3 years ago now, and when she got sick and it became apparent that she was not going to get better, she had a conversation with me one time, and she was expressing to me her disappointment in herself. And I was like, "Well, Mom, what are you disappointed about?" And she was just like, "Well, I just thought that if I ever found myself in this situation, that I would handle it better than how I'm handling it." And she was just so beside herself with just, she assumed that she would be stronger in that situation. And so it gets to the point of kind of like what you were saying. And her confession was sort of like, yeah, who I thought I would be in this situation is not actually who I turned out to be. And it sort of touches on kind of like what you're saying, that we all like to think we know how we would handle it or how we would be. But the reality is that until you are staring down the barrel of that gun, so to speak, you really don't know. And that's why we have to be careful sometimes to not be so quick to judge other people when we see certain things and become overly self-righteous when we haven't walked in those shoes or haven't faced those same circumstances or decisions.
I agree. Well, Phyllis, that's all I got. Is there anything else that needs to be brought up or you want to circle back and discuss?
One thing we didn't touch on today, but it's probably worth mentioning, and it probably just got buried in a bunch of the other news, was how the Democrats actually tried to get through some amendments as a part of that I think it's a reconciliation bill that would protect U.S. citizens against deportation from by ICE in terms of what Trump had been doing. And the Republicans pretty much knocked down all of those amendments that the Democrats attempted to get in there. And so it's just a reminder to us about how troubling we should, be looking at these situations, the Garcia situations and other situations where folks are being deported, sent to El Salvadorian prisons, not being brought back, in spite of what the Supreme Court is saying. And now the fact that you've got a majority in Congress who aren't even willing to commit to protecting U.S. citizens from facing that same sort of attack should be very frightening to all of us. In other words, if you decide to be the target, there's no help coming for you. Like, that's essentially what that message is, and it's a disturbing message.
I would add that I hear people say, "Oh well, the Democrats are going to win the House and maybe the Senate. They're going to in 2026, and then they'll be able to fight back." Well, guess what? Trump appears, we don't know exactly, but he appears to be basically just ignoring the Supreme Court and the federal courts. They've told him to bring this guy back. They've said don't send any more people there. The judge said turn the plane around. They didn't do it. So it looks like he's ignoring them, that branch. And even if the Democrats get control of the House and the Senate, I think he'll just ignore them. And so, we all have to just keep our eyes on this. And as we see this happening, we need to at least realize what is going on in this country and what our country is becoming.
Nat is hilarious. He writes, Dump, been watching too much Locked Up Abroad, shaking my head. Yes. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I really appreciate you. To the audience, thanks for being here. Please lift us up with a like and a share on Facebook or YouTube or both. And have a great weekend. We'll be back next week. Yep. Thank you so much.
All right.